Chapter 11. Grandfather, granddaughter understands what you mean. Not to mention that it's not time yet. Even if it's time, there are some things that I can't bear. I can't pretend to be confused for the sake of that hypocritical joy. To me, that's more painful than real harm. Luo Peishan was silent for a moment and nodded slightly. It was unknown whether he agreed with her words or just simply expressed that he understood. There's no need to talk about the current situation. As for your marriage, I'll tell your grandmother and ask her to give you the greatest freedom to choose as much as possible. Within the scope of my ability, I'll also check for you. These words were even more excessive. It should be known that men were in charge of external affairs and women were in charge of domestic affairs. Few men would intervene in the affairs of the backyard. If others knew about it, they might be used as gossip, especially if it wasn't for their own interests. Thank you, grandfather. Jingwan was very grateful, but she calmly accepted this kindness. In front of people who understood, what shyness and what modesty were all empty. If you didn't care, you wouldn't care even if you went a little overboard. If you cared, even if you took a little more steps, it would still be wrong. This is the court bulletin. You can take it back and read it. It's just a pastime. Then granddaughter won't be polite. Her smile became even brighter. Ian, you can come back to get it after reading it. In the future, I'll ask someone to send a copy to you. If you have any ideas, you can come to me. So, the last sentence was the main point. Even if she was born a girl, with that ability, it wasn't that she couldn't use it at all, right? Occasionally, she could participate behind the scenes. Perhaps she could also grind down those good-for-nothing grandsons. Not bad, not bad. Jingwan understood what he meant. Because it wasn't a mandatory requirement, it was completely up to her. Naturally, she had no objections. After Jingwan left, Luo Rongwen wanted to say something but stopped. Since ancient times, marriage had been decided by the parents and matchmakers. Letting a girl make her own decision. If word got out, it would be a joke. Furthermore, to be honest, even Luo Rongyen did not expect his father to treat his daughter with such an attitude. It was simply another kind of extreme doting. If he were in Luo Rongyen's shoes, he would never do such a thing. He had his wife and children in his heart, but he always put himself first. Otherwise, even if he did not like the officialdom, he would work hard for them. The higher his position, the better his wife and children would be. But obviously, he did not think so. He only pursued what he wanted. As a father, shouldn't he reflect on himself? Boss, what do you want to say? Luo Peishan took a sip of tea and asked. Luo Rongwen seemed to ponder for a moment. Father, your son feels that it's okay to spoil this girl a little, but if it's too much, Luo Peishan glanced at him. He knew that this was not what his son wanted to say, but he still said softly, some people, even if you deliberately want to spoil them, it's hard to spoil them because they have self-control, know their limits, and never make things difficult for others. It makes people feel that they are not spoiling enough, and involuntarily want to spoil them more. It's good to spoil them really. The two brothers were really surprised. He said such sentimental words with a rare gentle expression. Was it really their father? Your mother is a good woman, but it's a pity that she was brought up too well by your grandfather's family. Because she sacrificed too much for me, I once wanted to spoil her. If she was a little tougher and more persistent, perhaps we wouldn't have your third brother and second sister in our family. If that's the case, I don't care at all. But she took care of the overall situation for me, and my nature is not so firm. The third girl is like your mother, but your mother thinks that she is more like me. Perhaps your mother has some regrets that she wants to fulfill on the third girl. After the second brother passed on the third girl's words, your mother's wish is also my wish. The two brothers looked at each other. Their father had never said anything about him and their mother had never said anything. In their view, their family was like many other families. Their parents respected each other. Their father worked hard outside for the sake of the family. Their mother was virtuous, dignified, and magnanimous. She took concubines for their father, taught their children, balanced the harem, and let their father have no worries. So, it was not like this. So, eldest brother, don't think about using the third girl in exchange for benefits. Otherwise, your mother will be sad. Father, your son didn't. Luo Rongwen braced himself and said in a low voice. Do you think you can hide your thoughts from your father? The third brother is stubborn and refuses to change. He always says that your father is not willing to help him. He doesn't take a look at himself. Do you really think that your father doesn't know what you are doing outside? With his little ability, he wants to get involved in the fight for the throne? Luo Peishan snorted coldly. It could be said that his imposing manner was at its peak. The two brothers unconsciously straightened their backs and listened without daring to breathe. Eldest brother, don't be like him. Doing things that only show compliance and disappoint your father. Father, don't worry. Your son wouldn't dare. He had already said it so clearly. If he still dared to act recklessly, he would be punished by the family law. All right, get out of here. Your son will take his leave. The two brothers said in unison. Wait, second brother. Think about how to coax your daughter when you go back. Luo Peishan said with a hidden smile. Luo Rongyan was a little confused. Father, what do you mean? And why did it feel like his father was gloating? It must be an illusion. Regarding Mo Lan, she didn't tell you to ask me directly, did she? Even if the result is good, you, as her father, sold her out. You're her father, so she naturally won't do anything disgraceful. However, it's very likely that she'll cause you some trouble. Be careful that you don't know what's going on in the next few days. That's impossible. His daughter had always been well behaved. How could she do such a thing? Luo Peishan looked at him indifferently. If you asked him how he knew that Jingwan would do such a thing, it was because he had done such things many times when he was young. Not only his father, but even his uncles and brothers were not spared. Unfortunately, because it was a small matter, they never knew the reason. They just felt that they were unlucky. Thinking about it now, they still missed it. He kindly reminded this stupid son of his. If he didn't believe him, there was nothing he could do. He waved his hand as if he was swatting a fly, telling him to get out of here quickly. Luo Rongyan thought about it again and again. His father said that his daughter was like him. Then, on the other hand, his father should know his daughter very well. Even if he couldn't believe everything he said, the probability was more than 70%. Because of his selfishness, he couldn't be considered a good father. Then, it was not a problem to spoil his daughter's little temper occasionally. Even if his daughter didn't know how to do anything, he would still give her some small toys. After thinking it through, Luo Rongyan went back and fiddled around in his study for a while. He took out a few of his favorite things and played with them with some reluctance. Then, he steeled his heart and asked the servant to send them to Jingwan. Jingwan received the gifts and was a little confused. These were all his favorite things and were worth a lot. Why would he give them to her for no reason? Master said that Master gave you a pot of Mo Lan. He doesn't have that kind of treasure, so he gave you some small toys. Jingwan understood after hearing the servant's words. She raised the corner of her lips. Since her father was so tactful, she naturally had to give him face. Go back and tell my father that he will have good luck in the next few days. As for Luo Rongyan's reaction after hearing this, his father was really good at foretelling. As for his daughter, Li Hongyuan received another letter from the secret guard in the evening. It didn't mean that he had to know everything about Jingwan every day. He still had to know the relatively important things. Some small things were related to the overall situation. Knowing the old fox Luo Peishan's attitude towards Jingwan, Li Hongyuan's impression of him improved a little. If he encountered any trouble in the future, he didn't mind secretly helping him. Fu Yunting hasn't come yet? The handsome man who had just entered the courtyard heard this and unconsciously paused. His face was expressionless, but only he knew that the cold air was drilling up from the soles of his feet. He wanted to turn around and leave, but unfortunately, he had the heart but not the guts. He was usually cautious about everything. Every time he came to Jin Wangfu, he would be dealt with by the living king of hell. If he dared to turn around, wouldn't he just give the living king of hell a ready-made excuse? Wouldn't he directly make him beg for death? When Eunuch Mu saw Fu Yunting, he greeted him with a smile, Shiziyi as well. Fu Yunting looked at him expressionlessly. He wanted to say, "This prince is not well at all. When has this prince ever been well? Also, don't think that this prince didn't see your sympathetic eyes. This prince doesn't need sympathy. Why haven't you come in yet? Are you waiting for this prince to invite you in?" Perhaps the shadow of the living king of hell was too deep, he couldn't help but tremble. He stepped into the study with the spirit of facing death unflinchingly. "This subordinate greets your highness." He lowered his head. Even so, he still felt like there was a dagger at his back. No need for formalities. Chapter 12. Yunting, how are the preparations for the wedding going? Li Hongyuan leaned back in his chair. His body was relaxed, with a bit of laziness. Coupled with his good looks, it was really pleasing to the eye. Even men couldn't help but take a few more glances. Replying to Wang Ye, "Everything is ready. The wedding date is set for 2 months later." Unfortunately, Fu Yunting was determined to be blind. "It's too long. The wedding must be held before the end of the month." His dark eyes stared unblinkingly at Fu Yunting. Yes. There were only a few days left until the end of the month. Fu Yunting really wanted to roar at him. What was he trying to do? According to the awkward position of Wu Anho, he might not be able to marry a decent wife for the rest of his life. He wasn't worried, so why was his master so worried? Could it be that this marriage has something to do with your great career? Were you afraid that a long delay would lead to unexpected changes? Li Hongyuan casually threw a small flat box to him. A wedding gift. Many thanks to Wang Ye. It was so light that he didn't know what was inside. Fu Yunting's heart trembled. He didn't know if this was the King of Hell's next move. He didn't know how many people had pledged their allegiance to Wang Ye, but among those who were familiar with him, who didn't say that he was Wang Ye's #1 right-hand man? Some even said that he was Wang Ye's pet molester. Motherfucker, he would rather work harder than a cow, or even be a free laborer, just to avoid meeting the King of Hell. As for the so-called pet molester, he was sometimes even willing to put down his dignity, hoping that it was true. At least, according to the character of this pet molester who would not last for more than 7 days, after 7 days, he would not be bothered with him anymore, which would be the best. Unfortunately, ever since this master secretly arranged a good marriage for him, this pet molester talk disappeared like smoke. It could be imagined how deep the damage Li Hongyuan caused to Fu Yunting. At first, Fu Yunting thought that this master treated everyone the same. Later, he found out that this was not the case. In private, he almost never showed any emotions. Even when he used bloody and cruel methods to deal with people, he was still as calm as an ancient well. No one could guess what he was thinking. Only when Fu Yunting met him alone, the gaze that fell on him was like a venomous snake staring at its prey, containing a violent storm that could tear him to pieces at any time. Fu Yunting thought several times that this person would take his life, but it didn't. Even if they sparred again and again in the martial arts arena, the bones in his body were broken one after another, and he fell into a coma no less than 3 times. In the end, he was still fine. He used the best wound medicine, and not the slightest bit of illness was left behind. At the same time, his martial arts skills were also increasing. He dared to say that in the current capital, there were not many people who could beat him. Fu Yunting understood that the King of Hell must have a grudge against him, but he did not know the reason why he would not take his life. After a long time, although he was afraid, he had gotten used to it. What he wanted to know the most right now was, what kind of grudge did they have? The grudge of killing his father and mother? Don't joke around. This person's father was the emperor. He, Fu Yunting, did not have the guts or ability to kill the emperor. And when his mother died, he, Fu Yunting, was not even born yet. The grudge of stealing his wife and killing his son? He, Fu Yunting, had always been clean and honest. In addition, His Highness Wu Anho had always been quick to get rid of him. He did not even have a Tongfang or a maidservant by his side, and Jin Wangfu also did not have a Wangfei, okay? And those who could have become Jin Wangfei, if they were not dead, then they had met with an accident. Even so, they had nothing to do with him. Wang Ye, can you tell me, how did this little one offend you? Could it be a grudge from a previous life? Scram. Yes. Was he going to let him go just like that? Fu Yunting felt that the box in his hand was hot to the touch. Li Hongyuan stared at a certain person's back, causing that person to involuntarily quicken his steps and quickly disappear. In this life, you will not have another chance. Li Hongyuan muttered in a voice that even he could not hear. Fu Yunting skillfully avoided the spies that were planted inside and outside Wu Anho. After returning to his room, he did not hesitate and directly opened the box. He was very clear that if Prince Jin gave him something, there was no reason for him to dispose of it without even looking at it. And the thing inside was far beyond his expectations. It was banknotes, and there was a total of 300,000 taels. Fu Yunting sat on the chair and looked at the banknotes in a daze. Their Wu Anho manor was formerly known as the founding Duke of Wuan's manor. The manor did not shrink because of the demotion. On the contrary, it was still full of flowers and brocade. It did not look worse than the Sun family's Duke Dinggua's manor. However, anyone who knew the inside story knew that this was just an illusion. No matter how beautiful the things were, they were all bestowed by the emperor. They could not eat or drink. The entire Wu Anho manor could not spend more than 1,000 taels of silver all year round, and this was the result of the entire manor living frugally. They had farms and shops, but they were all controlled by others. The money that came into their hands was barely enough for them to live a hard life. His 2 nephews and 1 niece might not even be able to tailor new clothes for a year. Most of the time, they would use the adults' clothes to make them smaller. Because they were watched too closely, he couldn't even think of other ways to get money. And this superficial glory was something that his uncles, his father, and his brothers had used their lives and blood on the battlefield in exchange for. Apart from the poor 3 dukes and 5 marquises, only his Fu family had persisted on the path of a military general. No matter how they declined, they still clenched their teeth and held on. Fu Yunting once did not understand the meaning of this persistence, until he was the only pillar left in the entire house of marquises. He could not forget the tattered corpses of his relatives. He could not forget the struggle and persistence of his eldest uncle, who was Wu Anho, as he lay paralyzed in bed for many years, refusing to close his eyes. He could not forget the jealousy and hatred in the eyes of the other 3 dukes and 5 marquises when the count was promoted to marquis and the rewards flowed into the manor like water. He could not forget the jealousy and hatred in the eyes of the other 3 dukes and 5 marquises. He could not forget his little niece wearing old clothes on the outside to attend a banquet. Her clothes were deliberately torn and she was wantonly ridiculed and humiliated. He could not forget his nephews coming back from school with bruised noses and swollen faces. He could not forget them always asking him why. He could not forget the widows in the manor crying until their eyes went blind. The Fu family is full of martyrs. How can there be such a coward like you, Fu Yunting? You're so cowardly and weak that you can't even compare to a delicate girl. Fu Yunting, the person who should have died on the battlefield is you. They had never thought about who was the one who had given them their luxurious life. He hated them so much that he wished he could kill all of them. However, he could not. He could do nothing but endure. Whenever he made a mistake, Jin Shong would accuse him of a great crime and remove him, the only pillar of support, and then give Wu Anho rewards and appeasement. This was the so-called cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. How many times could the rest of the women and children play with Jin Shong? Jin Shong had done so perfectly that it did not damage his prestige in the hearts of the people. He even gained a good reputation for treating meritorious officials well. He had already left Wu Anho isolated and helpless, at his mercy. Yunting, live well. There is always hope as long as you live. Maybe there will be a turn for the better in the next moment. We can't shrink back. If we shrink back, we will be doomed eternally. Do you understand? Eldest uncle's bony hand grabbed him tightly, as if it was about to break. He agreed with tears. That was the last time he shed tears. From then on, Wu Anho became arrogant and ignored outsiders. Fu Yunting ate, drank, and played, and was an extraordinary hedonist. Because of this situation, when Prince Jin was secretly recruiting him, after seeing Prince Jin's extraordinary ability, he didn't hesitate to submit. Even if Prince Jin didn't like him and made him suffer countless times, he didn't think of submitting to another master. It wasn't just because no one else was willing to use the Wu and Marquis household. More importantly, other than the fact that Prince Jin was against him, he was definitely a good master. As long as he worked for him wholeheartedly and didn't have any thoughts of rebelling, he was always generous. With regards to Prince Jin, Fu Yunting still had some doubts. According to his ability, there was no need for him to involve the Wu and Marquis household. Instead of saying that the Wu and Marquis household was his help, it was more of a burden. If he was not careful, he would get into trouble. Although to him, the possibility of being exposed was very small. The reason for this was as inexplicable as why Jin Shong targeted him. Fu Yunting put away the banknotes, got up, and went to the main courtyard to visit his uncle. This was something he had to do every day, so it would not arouse the suspicion of spies. Not long after Fu Yunting entered Wu Anho's dormitory, he heard his anxious roar. Wu Anho, who had been paralyzed in bed for several years, was critically ill. This time, he was afraid that he was really going to die. The next day, Fu Yunting personally went to his fiancée's house, hoping that the wedding date would be brought forward. Otherwise, if Wu Anho was not well, the bride's family was very reasonable. If Wu Anho went, it would delay their daughter's wedding. Therefore, the wedding date was changed to 3 days later. Chapter 13. Because she was going to the Chen family, Jingwan changed her clothes before paying her respects. Compared to when she was at home, she looked more solemn. Whether it was the hair accessories, jewelry, or even the necklaces of her dress, they were all carefully selected. They were not the best, but they were the most suitable for her overall appearance. She had the beauty that belonged to her age, but she did not lose her dignity. It all showed her bearing and self-restraint. In addition, she had a good foundation to begin with, and her skin was fair and lustrous. Her originally not bad complexion was enhanced by 3 points. Old Madame Luo held Jingwan's hand and looked at her carefully. Good, good, good. Our family's WNWAN is indeed very beautiful. Last night, Luo Shangshu had told his old wife about his thoughts, and old Madame Luo did not disagree. WNWAN had been obedient and delicate since she was young. Anyone who saw her would feel sorry for her to the bone. Naturally, they hoped that her life would be smooth, happy, and healthy. The first time I saw you, I knew that you were pretty. But after taking care of you for 2 days, your skin is as tender as a peeled boiled egg. Eldest aunt, Madame Wang, praised her from the bottom of her heart. It was not the first time she had heard this kind of praise. Luo Jingwan was better than her in every aspect, but these people were all blind. Looking at her dazzling clothes, she could only endure it. Isn't that so? Fourth aunt's skin is also fair and delicate. Those who don't know would think that fourth aunt is not even 20 years old. Even grandmother looks 10 to 20 years younger than the other madams of the same age. Could it be that our Qian prefecture is really so nurturing? Luo Jingying interrupted with a smile. Of course, everyone loved to hear such praises. However, other than Madame Zhong and the little ones, who didn't understand the probing in her words, everyone present understood what she meant. If it was really the environment of Qian prefecture that nurtured people, it was not that the others had not stayed in Qian prefecture before, but they were similar to people from other places. Clearly, there was a problem here. Everyone loved beauty, especially this woman. As long as she could become more beautiful, she was willing to spend any amount of time and effort on her body. Jingwan's fourth aunt, Madame Wu, touched her smooth and tender face. Among the 4 sisters-in-law, her skin was really the best. She couldn't help but feel a little proud. She glanced at Jingwan and saw that she didn't have any reaction, so she said, "This is all thanks to Third Lass. In the past year, the rouge, face powder, and some creams that we used were all personally made by Third Lass. They are even better than the products sold in the world-famous Rouge Pavilion. The madams and maidens of Qi and Manor have tried every possible means to buy them from Third Lass. Outside, there are even people who are willing to pay more than 100 taels of silver for a small box the size of a thumb." Wow, good fellow. Those who didn't know could not help but gasp. They looked at Jingwan with eager eyes. It was not only the desire for beauty, but also, if she opened such a cosmetics shop, Wouldn't money fly in by itself as if it had grown wings? However, such good things, why didn't third older sister send some to second aunt? She only knew how to curry favor with her grandmother and didn't even care about her own mother. This was a good opportunity to let everyone see what kind of thing she was. Luo Jingwan. The scene fell silent again. Madame Zhong hurriedly said, WN mentioned it in her letter and also sent it once. After that, I told her not to send it anymore. Those things can't be kept for long. It's too troublesome to send it once a month. In any case, she will be coming to the capital in 1 or 2 years. There's no rush. Madame Zhong was not a talkative person, but the words that she occasionally said were pleasant to hear. Our third lass is not the kind of black-hearted villain who is good at scheming. Madame Wu smiled faintly. Was she implying that her Luo Jingying was good at scheming, black-hearted, and villain? Madame Liu knew what her daughter's expression was. Third lass, this is such a good thing. Third aunt is thick-skinned and wants to ask for some. This woman's skin has become rough when she gets older. Third aunt is joking. You still have the face of a flower and the face of the moon. I was just messing around for fun. I didn't expect the effect to be so good. However, I've almost used up all the concoctions I made in Qian Prefecture. When I have free time in 2 days, I'll make some more. Everyone will have a share. Jingwan smiled and promised. Jingwan was so generous that naturally everyone was happy. Third lass, have you never thought of opening a cosmetics shop? Third Aunt Liu asked with a smile. No matter how one looked at it, she was purely curious. I don't lack that money. It's too troublesome to open a shop. Jingwan fiddled with the double-sided embroidered handkerchief in her hand and said casually. You don't lack money, I do. You think it's troublesome, I don't think it's troublesome. Just give up the recipe. More than one person was roaring in their heart. They still had a smile on their face, but they couldn't hide the greed in the depths of their eyes. The entire Luo household had 200 to 300 years of accumulation. Naturally, they didn't lack money. The first branch was in charge of the household and was in charge of power. They didn't lack money. The second branch had Luo Rongyan, who occasionally dealt with gold and stone outside. It was easy for them to earn money. Every 3 to 5 days, they would spend a lot of money without batting an eyelid. They also had various subsidies from the old madam in the early years, so they lived more comfortably than the first branch. As for the fourth branch, as the youngest son of the old madam, they basically stayed by the old madam's side. They didn't need to pay for their own food and clothing, so they certainly didn't lack extra subsidies. The third branch didn't have the ability to make money. Mrs. Liu was born in a dilapidated Bofu. Her dowry was very shabby. In addition to the monthly allowance, Third Master Luo Rongping's salary could occasionally be used to get some filial piety in the name of Luo Shongshu. However, Luo Rongping's status in the Luo household was not prominent, so the filial piety was very limited. Therefore, the third branch was short of money, very short of money. If they wanted to buy something extra, they had to be stingy. As a result, Luo Jingying was naturally even more unbalanced. Almost every time she came back from the flower banquet and poetry recital, she would make a scene before going out. However, she never thought of not going out. Although we don't lack money, who would dislike having more money? If we really open a shop, there will be servants to do it. How troublesome will it be? Luo Jingying didn't give up and said. As long as she took out the recipe, she could always find a way to get it. She didn't notice Mrs. Liu's expression at all. Fourth miss, there are some things you don't know. When third miss makes cosmetics, all kinds of flowers account for a large proportion. Any pot of flowers raised by her can be sold for hundreds of taels. Not to mention those expensive flowers. How much cosmetics can those flowers make? Comparing the two, the gains don't make up for the losses. Besides, we don't even have enough people to use, so how can we sell them? The flowers raised by gardeners and farmers don't have such good effects. Mrs. Wu really couldn't bear to see some people being so thick-skinned. The effect is not good, but it's certainly better than the outside. Fourth sister, it's not good for a noble and lovely person like you to always talk about money. What if you are tainted by the smell of money? Jingwan's concubine-born younger sister, Luo Jingyu, suddenly opened her mouth. As soon as these words came out, Luo Jingying's face turned livid. The older sisters next to her covered their mouths to stifle their laughter. They looked at Luo Jingyu in a new light. In their impression, she was a sore-mouthed gourd, a blockhead, and an invisible person. She was far inferior to her younger sister, who was several years younger than her. They didn't expect her to be so sharp when she opened her mouth. Luo Jingying was the most knowledgeable among them, especially in poetry. She was often praised by the teachers. She was very proud of this. Because her eldest sister was married, her third sister was not around, and her second sister was just a concubine-born daughter who worked for her mother. Therefore, in the family school, she was very high and looked down on others. Luo Jingying's lungs were about to explode, but in front of the old madam, she didn't dare to lose her temper. She stared at Luo Jingyu as if she was dipped in poison. Then she looked at Jingwan with hatred. Just because this bitch also came to the capital and had someone to support her, a mere concubine-born daughter dared to talk to her like this. Just wait and see, every one of them will be counted. No one will have an easy time. Chapter 14. That's enough. Fourth's wife, take the children and WNWAN and stay here. Everyone else can leave. Old Madam finally spoke. No matter what the others thought, they didn't dare to say anything more. Just as they walked out of the door, Luo Jingying grabbed Luo Jingyu and lowered her voice. You wretched girl, how dare you talk to me like that? I can't deal with Luo Jingwan, but you think I can't deal with you? Fourth sister, what are you doing? Little ninth sister, Luo Jingwei, saw that her sister was being bullied, so she stepped forward and pushed Luo Jingying away. She rudely pulled Luo Jingyu's sleeve and bruised it. Fourth sister, why are you so vicious? Luo Jingying was caught off guard and staggered. She opened her mouth and wanted to curse, but Madame Liu hurriedly reached out and covered her mouth. You evil creature, don't you know that a girl's body is delicate? A little bit of pressure can hurt her. You're in a hurry to talk to your fifth sister, but you don't want to be noisy and affect your grandmother. You should be gentle when you pull her. Why aren't you apologizing to your fifth sister? Luo Jingying was yelled at by Madame Liu, and her mind finally cleared a little. She looked at Luo Jingyu's arm and looked at the people around her. She hurriedly followed her mother's words and apologized to Luo Jingyu softly. Her eyes were red, and she looked as if she was hurt by her sister's injury. Luo Jingwei still wanted to say something, but Luo Jingyu stopped her. Fourth sister, I'm fine. It's just that I didn't know that fourth sister was born with divine strength until today. But you have to be careful in the future. It's okay if you hurt your siblings, but if you go out, it's not good. If a man was born with divine strength, that would be a good thing. But if a lady from a noble family was labeled with such a label, the impact would be too bad. Not to mention other things, just in terms of marriage, if the man knew that the woman was a Herculean warrior, he would have to consider if there was a possibility of fighting in the future if they quarreled. Who would be willing to marry such a person? Madame Liu held Luo Jingying tightly. With a gentle smile, she looked at Luo Jingyu with pity. Luo Jingyu, your fourth sister was not born with great strength. She was just a little anxious just now and didn't know how to control her strength. If you ask me, you are the most delicate girl. Don't be angry. When we go back, I will teach her a lesson so that she won't dare to be so reckless in the future. Fourth aunt, you're being too serious. I'm really not angry. That's good. Madame Zhong stood on the side and didn't say anything, but her expression wasn't very good. Madame Liu looked at her and chuckled, I haven't congratulated second sister-in-law yet. You're going to be a mother again. Everyone looked at Madame Zhong curiously and unconsciously glanced at her belly. Was she pregnant again after more than 10 years? She was already in her 30s. Wasn't she giving birth to pearls when she was old? She was so lucky. Madame Zhong felt uncomfortable being stared at. It's not me. It's Madame Bai from our branch. By the way, I haven't. She told the old madam. Because she allowed Madame Bai to not pay respects to her and let the servants take good care of her, she forgot about it. Before she finished speaking, a hand reached out and took her arm. Grandmother said that it's still early. Let's talk about it after 3 months. Fourth aunt, you are well informed. Jingwan smiled and interrupted Madame Zhong's unfinished words. What's wrong? Grandmother asked me to come and see. Madame Liu changed the topic. She wanted to cause an internal dispute in the second branch and make grandmother dissatisfied. She wanted to see if she would agree. Third sister, it's nothing. It's just me and fourth sister playing. Did we affect grandmother? I'm sorry. Luo Jingyu took the initiative to speak with a little guilt. Luo Jingyu didn't want to pursue the matter. Jingwan nodded and didn't say anything. She watched the group of people leave. Her fifth sister was really an honest person, but when she occasionally became sharp, it was as if she had another personality. Jingwan had seen it many years ago. Although ninth sister was a troublemaker, when her fifth sister wanted to suppress her, it was just a matter of words and actions. It was good to let others see it, lest they think that the second branch was easy to bully. Jingwan went back and accompanied Madame Luo to have breakfast with her fourth aunt and the cousins of the fourth branch. Madame Liu took Luo Jingying back to the third branch and then asked someone to go to the home school and ask the teacher for a leave of absence for her. Madame Liu drank tea without saying a word. Luo Jingying was a little nervous because of her seriousness. Mother, kneel down. Mother, kneel down. Madame Liu, who originally had a sullen face, directly smashed the cup. The group of servants was frightened. They shrank their necks and wanted to find a hole to hide in and disappear. All of you get out. Madame Liu coldly glanced at them. As if they had been pardoned, they rushed out of the room as if they were fleeing. Luo Jingying had never seen her mother so angry. Because Madame Liu's anger was directed at her, she was even more frightened. She obediently kneeled down and said, Mother, don't be angry. Wasn't it all because, it's all because you're stupid. If you weren't stupid, people would know that you were short-sighted and stared at cousin's prescription. If you weren't stupid, would you do such a thing outside the main courtyard? In the past, in Qian Prefecture, you were as stupid as a pig. Because you were young, you could be forgiven if you did something wrong. I indulged you. In the past few years, I spent a lot of effort to teach you. I thought you learned well, but when you saw Luo Jingwan, you reverted to your old ways and forgot everything. It was as if you lost your mind. I told you a long time ago that the old madam is extremely biased. Even if it's her fault for fighting with Luo Jingwan, it's still your fault if the old madam says so. I've told you over and over again not to fight with her directly, but you just won't listen to me with your pig brain. You clearly have more advantages than her, but you don't know how to use them. As a girl, all you talk about is money. Even if you want to scheme, you should keep it in your heart. Even if you succeed in the future, Luo Jingwan will think of you first. Even if there is no evidence, based on today's matter, you will definitely not be able to get away with it. I will try my best to find the best teacher and the best etiquette instructor for you. I hope you will be chaste, gentle, virtuous, and not impatient in speaking and doing things. In some occasions, when you shouldn't interrupt, you should smile and hold it in. When it's time for you to show your face, you should be generous and do your best to show your talent. When it's time for you to fight for opportunities, you should be appropriate and not irritate people. You have to integrate these beautiful things into your bones bit by bit and become the most outstanding girl. Let those noble madams know that even if you don't have a good family background, you are still a person worthy of their attention and support. And your mouth, because you are used to cursing in your own courtyard, I will pretend that I didn't hear it. But because you are used to speaking without thinking, when you are outside, you will speak without thinking. From today onwards, no matter where you are, I will ask the etiquette instructor to slap you. If you can't control your temper, I will put you in confinement and not allow you to take half a step out of the courtyard. Mother. Luo Jingwan went from being wronged at the beginning to being shocked, and now to being in disbelief. Luo Jingying, now kneel properly and think about what I said. You are not allowed to get up until 2 hours later. Mrs. Liu got up, straightened her sleeves, and walked towards the door. Luo Jingying reached out and grabbed her clothes. Mother, daughter knows that she was wrong, don't. Madame Liu flung her away. Xian go and call fourth young lady's etiquette instructor over. Have her watch over fourth young lady. If fourth young lady is disobedient, whip her. Madame Liu had really hardened her heart to teach her a lesson. Mother. Luo Jingying looked at Mrs. Liu's ruthless and indifferent back. She still couldn't believe that this was the mother who doted on her and gave in to her. How could she be so cruel? Chapter 15. Unexpectedly, the etiquette instructor didn't reprimand her, nor did she tell her about the rules. Instead, she was calm and even a little loving. Miss, don't blame Madam. She also hates you. Your father is a lecherous man. He made a Tongfang pregnant before Madam married into our family. Besides, the eldest son and eldest daughter of the third branch are both born of concubines, making her a joke. However, because of the decline of your family, she has to swallow all the grievances and tears. Her only hope is you and 8th young master. But 8th young master is only 9 years old, and there are still many years before he can start a family. Moreover, if I may say something inappropriate, 8th young master doesn't look like a scholar. It's really hard to say what will happen in the future. Maybe Madam and even 8th young master can only rely on you in the future. Madam and 8th young master may depend on you. Madam and 8th young master may depend on you. She is afraid that you will fall in the palm of her hand. She is afraid that you will melt in her mouth. In her heart, whether she can rely on you or not is secondary. She hopes that you will be well and marry a good husband. Don't say any more. I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. I know what to do in the future. Luo Jingying cried and was out of breath. The etiquette instructor gently hugged her and stroked her hair. Our miss is the best. She can't be more intelligent. The etiquette instructor comforted Luo Jingying and then went to find Mrs. Liu. Thank you for your hard work, Nanny. That evil creature made you suffer again. Madam, you don't have to say that. In fact, 4th young lady is really smart. But perhaps because she was born to be opposite to 3rd young lady, she can't calm down when she meets 3rd young lady. I believe that after this experience, 4th young lady will be much better in the future. In fact, it's also my fault. I shouldn't have said something I shouldn't have said because Luo Jingwan's 8 characters were better than 4th young lady's. These 2 days, I found out how much Luo Jingwan's influence on 4th young lady's 8 characters was. It's like a demon. Mrs. Liu was a little tired because of her own mistakes. Since it's a demonic barrier, it'll be fine as long as I get rid of it. Who knows, I might even be able to soar to the heavens. Nanny, you're right. However, no matter whether Luo Jingwan is good or bad, let's not talk about her in detail. She needs to learn to grow up on her own. Whatever she does, we'll keep an eye on her. Apart from that, we can't be idle. The second branch has been living too comfortably. We have to find something for them to do, especially my second sister-in-law. She's really an eyesore. Mrs. Liu touched the wrinkles on the corner of her eyes. She spent a lot of time trying to smooth them out every day. But, her second sister-in-law was older than her, but she was more beautiful than her. She was already old, but her husband still doted on her. So, even if she had children, she didn't have so many troubles. Madame Bai's pregnancy was originally something that could be used, but because of that evil creature, we had no choice but to reveal it in advance, so it hasn't had any effect yet. However, as long as it's still in the womb, we can always do something. If second sister-in-law is in trouble, our 3rd young lady will probably be sad as well. Madam, you're right. Jingwan naturally didn't know about the scheme behind her back. After breakfast, when she accompanied Madame Luo to change clothes, she admitted her mistake to her grandmother. After all, without her grandmother's permission, she used her grandmother to shut 3rd aunt's mouth. Although she believed that her grandmother really knew about Madame Bai's pregnancy. But a mistake was a mistake. Madame Luo naturally didn't care about such a small matter. This was the difference between being favored and not being favored. If it was someone else, they would more or less be punished. At least, they would be verbally criticized. If they weren't favored, they might have to kneel in the small temple and copy the filial piety scriptures. Madame Luo could blindly indulge her, but Jingwan wouldn't indulge herself like that. She wouldn't allow similar things to happen again. Because if it became a habit, it might happen one after another. First, it would be a small matter, then it would accumulate little by little, and then it would be one big matter after another. If she always thought that she would be forgiven and that someone would deal with the aftermath, then one day, she might do something impulsively that she couldn't bear the consequences. Even if her grandmother's love for her hadn't been completely wiped out, what if the entire Luo family couldn't protect her? It would only bring disaster to the entire Luo family. This wasn't an alarmist talk. Whether it was in history or in the Qi Yuan dynasty, it was not uncommon for an unfilial descendant to harm the whole family. People's hearts were made of flesh. For more than 10 years, she was born in this family, grew up in this family, and received a lot of love and care. No matter how deep the influence of her previous life was on her, she couldn't leave herself out of the Luo family in this life and ignore it like an outsider. She had long become a part of this family and had to consider this family and her relatives. Although Jingwan didn't say anything, she had been raised by her for so many years. She could more or less guess what she was thinking. So, how could she not love such a gentle, considerate, and filial child? There were always some people who thought that she was biased and couldn't see their good and their excellence. However, they didn't see what they had done. The so-called flattery and the so-called excellence were all utilitarian and calculative. Putting herself in her shoes, if you didn't give your heart, how could you expect me to hold you in the palm of my hand? Wasn't it too ridiculous? Besides, a cold-hearted person would always feel that everyone owed him or her. When there were benefits, he or she would always rush to get a foot in it. Once there was trouble, he or she would hide faster than anyone else. Even if he or she was ruthless, what could this kind of person do? Even if it was mother and son, father and son, father and daughter, if it was just a passion, they might be selfless in a short period of time. However, after a long time, they would always feel cold. Jingwan helped to check the list of gifts prepared for the Chen family again. Because it was written very clearly on the list, Madame Luo naturally wouldn't have the situation of substandard goods. Therefore, with a glance, she knew in her heart. After all, when she was in Qian Manor, she often did such things. Occasionally, when she wasn't very sure, she would ask Madame Luo. The capital wasn't Qian Manor. Perhaps the rules were different, but she couldn't lose the big picture for small things. Seeing Jingwan's serious look, Madame Luo just smiled at the side and didn't say anything. She was very assured of Jingwan. In the past 2 years, the things that were sent out in her name, whether it was the people in Qian Manor or the various gifts sent to the capital, were all prepared by Jingwan. At first, she was very surprised at how quickly she learned and understood. After a few pointers, she didn't make any mistakes. When they left, it was almost another hour. Jingwan accompanied Madame Luo in the carriage in front, while fourth uncle and his family sat in the 2 carriages behind. There were also many servants. Originally, it was just a simple visit to relatives, but it was also mighty. When the commoners saw it, they all avoided it. This was the class of the rich and powerful. This was because in her previous life, her scumbag father was also a high-ranking official. Jingwan had long experienced this feeling, but it was far from being as deep as in this world. After all, in the world of her previous life, most of it was the officials who were courteous to the commoners. Wan, are you feeling uncomfortable? Obviously, on the way to the capital, Jingwan suffered from severe motion sickness, which scared Madame Luo. Grandmother, don't worry, I'm fine. In the past, when I was in Qian Manor, I was fine even if I went out of the city for 2 to 4 hours. I'm just afraid that after your first time, you'll feel uncomfortable once you touch the carriage. If you really feel uncomfortable, don't hold it in. Grandmother, it's not like you don't know that I've always been a delicate person who likes to enjoy life. I won't hold it in and suffer. The journey to the capital is long, and the road is uneven and bumpy. Isn't it only about an hour to go to Granduncle's house? I'm sure it'll be fine. Jingwan smiled and hugged Madame Luo's arm coquettishly. Madame Luo also smiled. It'd be great if our WN was really delicate. On the way, the voice of a young steward suddenly came from outside. Madam, Prince Rui's carriage is behind. Get out of the way, Madame Luo said without thinking. So the carriage moved to the side and slowly stopped. Jingwan pursed her lips and didn't say anything else. Chapter 16. This Prince Rui was the current emperor's third son, Li Hongming. His birth mother was the head of the 4 imperial concubines, noble consort Su. Noble consort Su had been favored for many years. In addition, Li Hongming himself was also extremely outstanding and deeply loved by the emperor. With the two added together, noble consort Su could even compete with the empress, who was born in Duke Ding Fu's Sun family. The other 3 imperial concubines also had to avoid her most of the time. Noble consort Su had a son and a daughter. The princess was the 5th, 15 or 16 years old. Her title was Minute Xiong, which was the age to choose a husband for marriage. In addition, she had an adopted son, the 6th prince, Li Hongyuan, who was titled Jin Qinwang. This Jin Qinwang's reputation didn't seem to be very good. The reason didn't seem to be because noble consort Su tried to smear his name, but because of himself. Noble consort Su had an advantage in the harem that none of the other imperial concubines could compare to. Is that old Madame Luo in the carriage? She originally thought that it would be fine as long as she gave way, but it seemed that her wish wouldn't come true. But in the blink of an eye, old Madame Luo's face turned solemn. She glanced at Jingwan, patted her hand, and then got out of the carriage. Jingwan sat quietly. She vaguely heard grandmother and 4th uncle's greetings, followed by another gentle and polite voice. Presumably, it was that Prince Rui. He greeted grandmother and praised 4th uncle. In the end, he hinted vaguely that 4th uncle could look for him if he needed anything. Old Madame Luo returned to the carriage. Jingwan hurriedly got up and went forward to support her. And it was this movement that allowed Li Hongming to vaguely see her silhouette. His eyes flashed slightly. Go and find out which Luo family's young lady is in the carriage. He didn't necessarily want to do anything, but it was a habit of people like them. It might be useful in the future, so it was better to be prepared. Yes. After Prince Rui's carriage left, Jingwan saw that her expression still hadn't eased. She was a bit worried. Grandmother? Old Madame Luo sighed softly. Don't worry, grandmother is fine. I'm just a bit emotional. This Prince Rui really lives up to his reputation. His temperament is good, and his methods are excellent. Just a few words, and your 4th uncle is about to be loyal to him. Jingwan chuckled. 4th uncle knows very well. He was also an extremely smooth person, and his acting skills were at the level of an award-winning actor. Your 4th uncle is really tempted, although it's not as exaggerated as it seems. Jingwan's smile faded a little, and she said in an inaudible voice, yes, after all, Prince Rui has a great chance of winning. I know your 4th uncle best. With your grandfather suppressing him, he won't get involved. However, WN, do you know that your 3rd uncle is very close to the 1st prince, Prince Kang, and his people? He's still far from the core circle. But if he keeps jumping around like this, he might implicate the whole Luo family. If he prospers, we prosper, and if he suffers, we suffer. 3rd uncle wants to climb up the social ladder. Grandfather, why don't you fulfill his wish? Sometimes, the harder a person presses down, the stronger the rebound will be. I'm afraid that he's not satisfied with the position that your grandfather values. If your grandfather really helps him to the position that he's satisfied with, people will see that your grandfather's connections and ability aren't as simple as they seem on the surface. He won't be able to stay out of it anymore. Old Madame Luo sighed softly. In our family, your father is the most worry-free one. Jingwan thought that her grandfather's position as the Minister of Rights was indeed intentional. She couldn't help but laugh. There's nothing wrong with father's position. It's just that it will affect your marriage. No matter how good your grandfather is, he's still a generation away from you. He's already so old. In addition to the current situation, there's a limit to how much he can help his grandson-in-law. Your father's mediocrity will always make you lower your head. Everyone has their own fate. If a man relies on the family for everything, I won't take a liking to him. A real man should fight for what he wants. The strength of others can at most be used as a supporting point, but it shouldn't be used as a ladder for him to climb up. If that's the case, even if he climbs up, he won't know how strong it is because he doesn't know how strong it is. He might even collapse at any time. Only by grasping it in his own hands and laying down the cornerstone himself can he know how strong it is and how high it can support him. Old Madame Luo was stunned. This was the first time Jingwan had said such words to her. It was impossible for her not to be surprised. This was completely different from the WN she knew. Her words could be said to be contrary to the current situation, but she agreed with it very much. It reminded her of her husband, Luo Peishan. Old Madame Luo hugged her in her arms. No wonder your grandfather found it a pity that you're not a man. Sure enough, the third girl was the most like him. Even their thoughts were so similar. However, WN Wan's words were refreshing. But WN, the kind of man you're talking about is not easy to control. Why should I control him? I yearn to be with him for the rest of my life, but I don't expect it. If he gives me enough respect, I don't mind being his virtuous wife. Be with him for the rest of your life. What an extravagant hope. Back then, I had some possibility too, but I didn't dare to take the risk because people's hearts are fickle. In just a few decades, things might change. Moreover, if your grandfather agreed the first time, I would be greedy for the second and third time. If I didn't get what I wanted, or if I was instigated by someone with ulterior motives, I might think that your grandfather had changed his mind. In that case, there would be estrangement, and our friendship would be gone. It's better now that your grandfather is old, and I've become the only woman standing by his side. Jingwan felt that the atmosphere was a little sad, so she said with a smile, Grandma, tell me about you and grandfather. Old Madame Luo came back to her senses and patted Jingwan. You're getting more and more presumptuous. Didn't I tell you about your grandfather and I long ago? It was okay to tell her granddaughter about the matter between husband and wife. If she told her granddaughter more, it would be disrespectful. How could such a flat, straightforward, and emotionless description count? The only thing that could be considered as gossip was her grandfather's arrest. However, Jingwan didn't really want to gossip. I'm very happy that you can tell me what's in your heart, but don't tell anyone else about this, not even your mother. I know. With my mother's temper, if I really told her, she might scold me and say that I'm a traitor. However, she won't say that she didn't teach me well because I was raised by you. Fortunately, I raised you. If she raised you, I don't know what she'll do to you. Your mother will be like this for the rest of her life. Don't expect anything from her. However, she and your father are a match made in heaven. Jingwan chuckled. If her father heard this, she didn't know what he would think. Because the grandmother and granddaughter were whispering and there was no one in the carriage to wait on them, their words naturally didn't reach a third person's ears. The group arrived at the Chen family smoothly. When Madame Luo got married, her grandfather was an elder and her father was also a second-rank official. Now, not to mention her grandfather, even her parents had passed away. Naturally, they weren't as prominent as before, but it wasn't too bad. When Madame Luo's grandfather passed away, she rushed back to see him for the last time. However, when her parents passed away, she couldn't return. Not only was Qian Prefecture far away and the Luo family was in mourning, she was also bedridden and almost couldn't get up. It could be said that this was her biggest regret in life. The current head of the family was Madame Luo's elder brother. They hadn't seen each other for more than 10 years. Chen Changshu had specially taken a day off because his sister had returned home. When the siblings met, their eyes couldn't help but redden. Madame Luo was anxious and first lit incense in front of her parents' memorial tablets. Perhaps she thought of something and couldn't help but cry. Gradually, she cried uncontrollably and the people around her comforted her. They all knew that her health wasn't good in the past and it took her so many years to reach her current state. They were really afraid that her crying would hurt her body. After a lot of persuasion, Madame Luo finally stopped crying. After old Madame Luo finished washing up, the two siblings had a private chat. Chen Changshu then went to work. He was in the Ministry of Revenue, and although the natural disasters that happened in some places a few days ago were not particularly serious, the Ministry of Revenue was still very busy. After that, the juniors from both sides formally greeted the elders. The juniors all received greeting gifts. Other than the children under the age of 7, the rest of the men went to the front yard to chat. Jingwan and the rest of the juniors, including the little bean who just learned to walk, were also chased out. Madame Luo had a total of 3 brothers. Her second brother was born of a concubine and moved out after the family split. Today, her second brother's family naturally came over. Madame Chen was also born of a noble family. When she was young, her temperament was relatively gentle. Now, she was also a kind old woman. Towards such a person, even if her second brother was born of a concubine, Madame Luo didn't have any bad feelings. As for her sister-in-law, she was actually a close friend of hers. Their temperaments were congenial and naturally, there was no estrangement. As for Madame Luo's third brother, because of his poor health a few years ago, he retired from his official position. He was an only son, but he wasn't cut out for the bureaucracy. He simply brought his family back to his hometown. Chapter 17. The 3 old women with the highest seniority got along well with each other. The daughters-in-law below them naturally had a smiling face. They either listened or occasionally interjected. At this time, even if there was any filth between them, they would not be so stupid as to show it on the surface. I haven't been in the capital all these years. I've troubled you to take care of those bastards at home. I'm sorry. We're family. Aren't we estranged from each other? Madame Chen's mother was born in a family of generals. Influenced by her mother, she was quite forthright. As she grew older, she gradually restrained herself. However, when facing her former close friend, she showed signs of recovery. Madame Luo couldn't do anything about it. If she continued, she was afraid that Madame Luo would really get angry with her. So, she began to talk about the younger generation of the family. Unsurprisingly, they talked about Jingwan's marriage. To be honest, although I've planned to come to the capital this time, part of the reason is my granddaughter. If I can find her a good husband, I'll be relieved. She had noticed that Madame Luo treated Jingwan differently. Before they came to the capital, she had occasionally heard about it. But she didn't expect that she cared so much about it. Tell me, what kind of man do you want? Since it was about Jingwan, Madame Luo naturally didn't hold back. First of all, he must have a good character and be ambitious. He doesn't need to be handsome, but at least he should be decent. His family background should be simple, especially the future mother-in-law. She can't be sharp and gentle. My second son will probably be like that in his life. So, I don't expect him to have a good family background. It's enough if he can be good to WNWAN. Your requirements are neither high nor low. Is this not low? I didn't ask him not to take in concubines or raise a concubine. It's good enough that he only has WNWAN in his heart. Madame Luo was a little dissatisfied with Madame Chen's words. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even choosing a son-in-law shouldn't be like this, right? Old Madame Chen sighed. Let's not talk about the fact that you won't be able to sleep with a concubine. But looking at your thoughts, at least you can't go too far. You can't spoil the concubine and neglect the wife. This person has a long life. Naturally, the selection of people has to be more meticulous. It's not enough to just look at the surface. We have to do a thorough investigation. I'm more familiar with the current capital than you are. Give me a few days and I'll ask around. Thank you, sister-in-law. Enough, stop putting on an act. When were you ever courteous with me when you were young? Old Madame Chen scolded with a smile. That's because sister-in-law gave in to me. Madame Luo also smiled. Mother, if you ask me, there's already a good candidate. Minute Jia should be able to meet aunt's requirements in all aspects. A woman slowly peeled the almonds. She didn't eat them and just put them on a plate at the side. As soon as she finished speaking, the woman sitting opposite her stared at her like a knife. However, she didn't show any weakness. Instead, she straightened her back and looked at the woman with a smile. After her reminder, old Madame Chen clapped her hands. That's right, how could I forget about Minute Jia? Minute Jia? The one just now? Madame Luo hadn't calmed down at that time. She didn't see clearly and didn't have much of an impression. Speaking of which, it was the eldest grandson of Madame Luo's third brother, Chen Zhengmin. He was 16 years old. Because he was going to the capital to take the imperial exam, he was staying at his eldest granduncle's house. Yes, Minute Jia has been staying at home for the past few months. Although I can't say I'm 100% sure of his character, I'm still 70% sure. He's polite, modest, and knowledgeable. Your elder brother said that if there's no accident, he'll be one of the top 10 in the 2nd grade. If he's lucky, he might even be able to come in 3rd like my brother-in-law back then. The key is that there was a shameless girl who threw herself at him, but he wasn't moved at all. He left her to me to deal with and didn't cross the line at all. He's very well behaved. Madame Luo was a little moved. It sounded like a good candidate. After he came to the capital, my 3rd sister-in-law also sent me a letter. If it's suitable, I'll find him a good wife in the capital. I don't know what your family's Jingwan is like, but based on my understanding of you, she's definitely a good girl. Moreover, my 3rd uncle and the others have great expectations for Minute Jia, so they don't mind him staying in the capital. With my brother-in-law's ability, it's naturally not difficult for him to do this. In this way, your 3rd daughter doesn't have to marry far away. The more I talk about it, the more I feel that the two of them are suitable. The timing is also very coincidental, as if it's predestined by fate. Madame Chen nodded as she spoke. Mother, my husband is also in the front yard. Isn't he also going to take the imperial exam this year? I think he'll meet Minute Jia and have a lot to talk about. He'll know more or less about him. Go back and ask my husband. You'll see Minute Jia again later, Madame Wu said. However, Madame Wu didn't have much hope for her husband. Otherwise, he would have gone to the capital to study in peace long ago. Why would he wait until he was with Madame Wu? She might have had some hope in the early years, but now, it was dispensable. Now that you mention it, I remember that Minute Jia has also been to your house once or twice. I heard that my brother-in-law personally taught him once. My brother-in-law has a good impression of him. You can go back and ask him. Madame Luo nodded. To be able to gain her husband's favor, this child was at least good in some aspects. She had an idea. Madame Chen thought of another matter. Since you're preparing to choose a husband for her, why haven't I seen any movements from your eldest daughter-in-law and her mother? I didn't tell them in advance. If I let you search for her, it's most likely because you're considering my eldest son's future and interests. If I tell her the conditions clearly, she probably won't be so dedicated. That's not what I want to see. As for Wan's mother, she's not important. I don't intend to let her interfere in Wan's marriage. Madame Chen also smiled. Your second daughter-in-law is lucky. But for the child, it's not a blessing. In the end, only Madame Luo and Madame Chen were left to talk privately. Everyone else dispersed. The daughters-in-law of the Chen family's 3rd branch followed behind second Madame Chen. One of them, whose family name was Yun, finally couldn't help but say, Mother, I took a fancy to Minute Jia for my niece. What right do they have to snatch him away? And that bitch won, she clearly knows what I mean, but she deliberately goes against me. She angrily pulled at her handkerchief. Her eyes were about to burst into flames. However, second Madame Chen still walked forward unhurriedly. The other woman beside her also ignored her. Mother, you have to think of a way. This damn old woman. She said she was kind, but in fact, she was cowardly. She didn't know how to fight or snatch. Otherwise, their second branch would definitely be much better than now. She was so angry that she didn't know where to vent her anger. Second Madame Chen was probably annoyed by her. She stopped and turned around. He was chosen for your niece. How thick-skinned do you have to be to say that? What's wrong with that? Yun stiffened her neck and replied. Second Madame Chen laughed. It was a mockery that Yun had never seen before. Your niece is shameless. She repeatedly pestered Minute Jia. Minute Jia has a good temper, so he left her some face. Don't you think what she did was right? That's right. Didn't you do this to my son back then? Birds of a feather flock together. Yun's face flushed red. Mother, don't make slanderous accusations. She gritted her teeth and said hatefully. Second Madame Chen completely ignored her anger. Whether or not I'm making slanderous accusations, you know best in your heart. For my son's sake, I'll give you a piece of advice. Your little tricks can be used on my stupid son. Now that your eldest aunt has the intention to reconcile Minute Jia with your aunt's child, if you use similar methods on Minute Jia, how can she continue to tolerate your niece? If she continues to be so stubborn, when your eldest aunt's thunderous methods strike, she will definitely ruin her reputation. After that, all the girls in your maternal family will be unlucky. Don't let anyone die when the time comes, including you, who will be the sinner of your maternal family. Yoon felt a little guilty at first, then she was stunned. Mother, you're joking, right? Would eldest aunt do that? Chapter 18. Li Hongming quickly learned of Jingwan's identity from his subordinates. He was slightly disappointed that she wasn't from the main branch, but from the second branch. However, she was the only grandchild left by Madame Luo aside from the fourth branch of the Luo family. It could be seen that she was deeply doted on by Madame Luo. Even if the value of the marriage wasn't that great, there might be other uses for her in the future. Luo Peishan was currently sitting in the position of Minister of Rights. He wasn't very useful, but he knew that Luo Peishan was quite capable. He just lacked some luck, otherwise he would have been sitting in the position of Minister of War. The Minister of Appointments was old and had been plagued with illness for the past year. From time to time, he would ask for leave. It was very likely that he would retire after this examination. The brothers were all fighting openly and covertly to push their own people up. However, he didn't have a suitable candidate right now. He was also considering pushing those neutral people up and putting his label on them. In his heart, he screened the people with the ability one by one and found that Luo Peishan was really a good candidate. After pushing him up, he would marry a girl from the Luo family as a secondary consort. Basically, he would firmly tie Luo Peishan to his side. Thinking of this, Li Hongming's mood became even better. It wasn't that he didn't consider that the other brothers might make the same choice, but he was confident that no one else would have the right to interfere if he made a move. There was no morning court today, but the things that needed to be done still had to be done. Li Hongming first went to the Yamen of the Ministry of Revenue to finish the things at hand. Because he was a prince, a Wang, he only had a nominal position in the Ministry of Revenue. There weren't many things that he needed to personally handle. What he really needed to do was to know the situation in the Ministry of Revenue in detail. After all, even with his noble status, there were some things that he couldn't come into contact with. This required him to slowly gather people, slowly understand the situation, and slowly infiltrate. After dealing with the Ministry of Revenue, Li Hongming entered the palace and went directly to see Noble Consort Su. In Noble Consort Su's place, Li Hongming was rarely relaxed. After sitting down, he seemed a bit lazy. Although he didn't have Li Hongyuan's pitilessly good looks, he was still tall and handsome. Even if he was wearing casual clothes, he didn't lack the bearing of a prince. It could be said that he had the bearing of a dragon, a phoenix, and an imposing appearance. Ming-er, Yuan-er's temper has been so bad recently, and it has lasted for so long. Who provoked him? Imperial concubine Su, who was dressed in formal attire, sat high up in the main hall of the Jade Essence Palace. Her eyes were slightly lowered, restraining the unique charm formed by the upturned corners of her eyes. She carelessly fiddled with her long, carefully manicured nails. Her nails were not painted with nail polish, but a natural pink color. She was already over 40 years old, but there were not many traces of age on her body. Especially her hands, which were slender and beautiful, with plump and round fingertips. Who knows? He was dissatisfied that Imperial concubine Su had asked about the person he hated the moment she opened her mouth, so he couldn't help but be a little perfunctory and indifferent. Imperial consort Su glanced at her son. Your Imperial father doesn't allow him to enter the palace, and Imperial mother can't see him. As his elder brother, you naturally have to care for your younger brother. Go and see him after you leave the palace. He is. His lazy posture was tinged with a bit of hostility, and he couldn't help but raise his voice. Ming-er. Imperial concubine Su calmly interrupted him. Her usually gentle gaze now contained a trace of sharpness. Li Hongming met her gaze, and the momentum on his body disappeared. He unnaturally turned his head away. He didn't want to admit that he respected and feared this woman who gave birth to him, raised him, and spoiled him. He didn't want to admit that there was still fear in his heart at this time. Ming-er, I have always treated you and Yuan equally. You can't take it for granted that I should treat you better just because he didn't crawl out of my womb. He has been raised by my side since he was little. In my opinion, he is the same as you. You are already married, with a wife and a daughter. Why are you still jealous like a little girl? Imperial concubine Su gently smiled. Go and see him after you leave the palace, understand? Li Hongming stared at Imperial concubine Su for a moment, and then put away all his emotions. Like a modest gentleman, he answered with a perfect and warm smile, yes. The mother and son happily talked about other things, mixed with light laughter from time to time. The atmosphere was very good. The palace servants next to them all sighed with emotion that Imperial concubine Su was indeed a gentle and good mother. Even if she secretly fought with the Empress and the other concubines, it couldn't erase the fact that she was the best mother in the harem. Thinking about the bad-tempered, ruthless, and willful Prince Jin, who sometimes even dared to talk back to His Majesty, he was the most obedient in front of Imperial concubine Su. In the afternoon, ask Lady Liu to bring my 2 granddaughters into the palace. The Lady Liu mentioned by Imperial concubine Su was Prince Rui's legal wife. Li Hongming nodded. Okay. How is Lady Qian? Imperial concubine Su asked faintly. Li Hongming glanced at Imperial concubine Su, who was casually drinking tea, and slightly lowered his eyes. She's fine. His Wang Fei was virtuous and kind. She provided Lady Liu with good food and drinks, and there were 2 female medical attendants by her side at all times. Every 3 days, an imperial physician would come to the Fu to take her pulse. There was no trouble at all, so it was hard for her not to be well. No matter how ironic he felt in his heart, he didn't show it. If I give birth to a boy, is Lady Liu going to raise him herself, or ask for Lady Qian to be concubine? Lady Qian was only a concubine, so she naturally didn't have the qualifications to raise an imperial grandson. Both. Imperial concubine Su looked at her son with slight surprise. If Lady Qian became a concubine, then the harem of Lord Rui's mansion would be lively in the future. You can decide for yourselves. Okay, I won't keep you any longer. Leave the palace early. Ursi Hen will take his leave. Li Hongming stepped out of the gate of the Jade Essence Palace and slowly exhaled. This place made him relax, but also made him feel depressed. He relaxed because he didn't have to hide his various schemes, and the source of his depression was self-evident. Even if all his good mood was gone, Li Hongming was still the polite and cultured Li Hongming. But when he thought of meeting that bastard, his heart felt suffocated. He couldn't afford to offend that devil incarnate, okay? Perhaps to disperse the depression in his heart, or perhaps to see that bastard as late as possible, Li Hongming deliberately slowed down his steps, which made him look more graceful and noble. He didn't know how many palace maids blushed. They weren't originally on the same path, but they all turned a corner and had a chance encounter in front of him. Greetings to Prince Rui. Li Hongming didn't know how many times he said you're excused. Every time he said it, his heart became more irritable. He wished he could drag all these people out and beat them to death. Unfortunately, he wasn't Li Hongyuan. The people he had always disdained made him envious at this time. If he was unhappy, he would kick them. Not only would he not receive any punishment, but a group of people would coax him as if he was their ancestor, only asking him to calm down. That kind of satisfaction, he, Li Hongming, could probably only occasionally enjoy it in private. If it happened too many times, he was afraid it would spread to Fu Huang's ears and ruin his image. He couldn't help but quicken his steps. Even if that bastard made his liver hurt, he was still Fu Huang's son. It was better than being sulked here by these servants. Li Hongming arrived at Jin Wangfu. Because he was unhappy, after confirming that Li Hongyuan was in the Fu, he directly barged in without waiting for a report. The Fu's guards naturally didn't dare to stop him. However, none of the servants in Jin Wangfu didn't have eyes. Before Li Hongming even entered the door, someone had already reported to Li Hongyuan. Li Hongyuan was in the pavilion in the back garden, leaning on the couch and drinking wine. Around him, The music of bamboo and wind instruments lingered. Hundreds of flowers bloomed and dancers danced enchanting. It was a scene of drunken stupor. It would be a lie if Li Hongming said he wasn't jealous. However, his fu didn't even have an opera troupe, let alone these multi-talented and beautiful concubines. It wasn't that he couldn't afford it. In the end, it was still a matter of appearance. Chapter 19. Li Hongyuan shook the wine jug in his hand. It was empty, so he casually tossed it to the side. Only then did Li Hongyuan notice that there were already 5 or 6 empty wine jugs on the ground. Smelling the fragrance in the air, the 100-year-old top-grade 100 Flowers wine was just for him to drink like water. His heart was once again unbalanced. Who among his brothers was as extravagant as him? If others dared to do this, they would have been scolded by Imperial Father. Only this bastard. Imperial Father had used all kinds of punishment methods, but he still refused to change. Imperial Father had long given up on him. If there were too many impeachment memorials from the court, Emperor Le would wildly scold them. Did they have nothing better to do? Instead of doing their own things, they only knew how to stare at his son all day long. He was the dignified ruler of the world, but he couldn't control his son. It was very tiring. This group of blind people even deliberately sprinkled salt on his wound. Everyone knew that the emperor didn't like Prince Jin on the surface, but for some reason, he favored him in his heart. Otherwise, with Li Hongyuan's detestable character, he would have been ganged up on and killed long ago. However, the more he lived, the more unfettered he became. Those who opposed him didn't have a good ending. Fine, if they saw him in the future, they would take a detour. Because of his mother, he was treated quite well in front of this person. Many of his brothers had been beaten up by him, and the princesses and princesses of the imperial family had also been angered to tears by him in various ways. Thinking of this, his heart was a lot more balanced. Li Hongming repeatedly reminded himself that there were gains and losses. Then he calmly asked, "What's wrong recently? Why are you so angry? Who provoked you?" He acted like a good brother. Li Hongyuan finally gave him a charitable look. "Do I need a reason to be in a bad mood?" The corner of Li Hongming's mouth twitched. Who the hell would be in a bad mood for no reason? Even if he was temperamental, after such a long time, he should have calmed down. Imperial Mother is very worried about you. Li Hongyuan's hand that was holding the wine cup paused. The drunkenness in his eyes seemed to dissipate a little. Tomorrow, this prince will go to the palace to see her. Li Hongming laughed sarcastically in his heart. Sometimes, he would think, between him and his 6th brother, who was more pitiful. But Imperial Father still hasn't removed the ban on you. Li Hongyuan curled his lips in disdain. Do you think those gatekeepers of the palace can stop this prince? How many people would do anything to become a guard of the imperial palace? Were they just gatekeepers in this person's eyes? A bunch of dogs. Li Hongming thought that he had the gift of the gab. No matter what the topic was, he would be able to answer it. However, he was repeatedly thwarted by Li Hongyuan. When this devil incarnate spoke, he would either leave you speechless or choke you until your liver hurt. All right, do as you see fit. After that, Li Hongming shifted his gaze to the group of dancers. Li Hongming was not particularly fond of beauties, but at this time, he was deeply attracted to the leading dancer. Her face was covered with a light veil, and her flexible waist was faintly discernible. The gauze skirt below was fluttering, and her eyes were like rippling waves. That gaze of hers was as if she saw you as the love of her heart, but also as if there was nothing in the world that could enter her eyes. She was seductive and unapproachable, which made people want to conquer her. To put it more bluntly, she was a natural stunner. Li Hongyuan's throat moved. Perhaps it was because he had drunk the aged wine, but his whole body was a little hot. Li Hongming had always been a self-disciplined person, so naturally, he would not lose his composure because of this scene. He looked at Li Hongyuan. Such a beauty, where did you get her? Li Hongyuan might be really drunk, so he did not pay attention to him at all. So Eunuch Mu did his duty and answered for his master, "Your Highness, she was sent by the dance studio." The dance studio was a private dance studio in the capital. It was rumored that the boss behind it was the #1 dancer from more than 20 years ago. She specialized in training dancers, either by training the people she bought and selling them, or by helping people train them. Although the former were not all beautiful, their figures were absolutely top-notch. Not only high officials and nobles liked them, but also brothels liked them. As for the latter, as long as you were willing to spend money, you could send any man or woman. That's right, both men and women could be sent there. According to the requirements of each customer, the difficulty of training was different, and the price was not the same. But the lowest price was thousands of taels of silver, and it was said that no customer was dissatisfied with the result of training. Li Hongyuan was a regular customer of the dance studio. Of course, he only bought ready-made ones, and the one in front of him was sent by the dance studio. It was reasonable. How could a woman's dance studio have a foothold in the capital without a backer? Not to mention other things, those tigresses of high officials and nobles could crush the dance studio to ashes. Sixth brother, you have good luck with women, Li Hongming said in a slightly hoarse voice. Li Hongyuan had already closed his eyes slightly and restrained his usual violent aura. His whole person looked infinitely magnificent. Li Hongming secretly clicked his tongue. If he met someone who liked Nan Feng, he was afraid that he would be completely unable to control himself and directly throw himself at him. Even if he knew that the consequences would be very miserable, he would still do it without hesitation. It was no wonder that outsiders would say that Li Hongyuan, Prince Jin, was useless except for his face. However, there were still many women who wanted to throw themselves into his arms like moths to a flame. They wanted his pity, they wanted to occupy the most important position in his heart, and they also wanted to know what he would look like if he really fell in love with someone. Li Hongyuan was a good beauty. If you didn't have a good appearance, don't even think about letting him take a second look at you. However, there was also a saying of 7 days of favor. Those who caught his eye would receive 100% of his favor. A woman who was doted on by him could simply become the happiest woman in the world. Unfortunately, it would never exceed 7 days, because the feeling of being doted on by him was too wonderful. Many women wanted to break this curse like 7 days by luck, but none of them had a good ending. As a result, after so many years, a path of withered bones and beauties was paved under his feet. When the dancer finished her song, the surroundings also became quiet. The dancer took graceful steps and slowly approached Li Hongyuan. Her appearance was truly one of deep love, and her eyes were filled with admiration. The woman that Li Hongming wanted to conquer just a moment ago was now completely submissive to another man. He unconsciously tightened his grip on the cup. Prince. The dancer gently leaned against the edge of the couch. Looking at Li Hongyuan's face, she became more and more infatuated. She leaned over and reached out her hand. Suddenly, an unforeseen event occurred. The dancer was kicked off the couch by Li Hongyuan. That strength was so fierce that Li Hongming seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. The dancer screamed, her face instantly turned pale, and she fell to the ground. For a while, she didn't dare to move. Li Hongyuan sat up and unhurriedly straightened his clothes. It's taken care of. He got up and walked away with slightly drunk steps. Sixth brother, since this dancer made you unhappy, why don't you give her to third brother? Li Hongming looked at the woman and unexpectedly opened his mouth. Unfortunately, Li Hongyuan still didn't give him face and ignored him. Li Hongming clenched his fists. Your Highness, you just need to take them back, Eunuch Mu said respectfully. Oh, you can make the decision on this matter. Sixth brother won't be angry. Li Hongming loosened his hand and said with a smile. Eunuch Mu smiled awkwardly at Li Hongming. Prince, you know what kind of temper our master has. If he is tired of her, he can do whatever he wants with her. So, 7 days have passed. Li Hongming's expression was a little bad. No, this dancer was just sent here yesterday. It's just that master's temper has been bad recently, so he doesn't have the mood. I see. No wonder he doesn't have tender feelings for the fairer sex. Li Hongming got up and walked to the dancer. He squatted down, raised her chin, and took off the veil. She was worthy of being kept by his good brother, who had seen countless beauties. Even if she hadn't won his favor, she was absolutely stunning. A beauty is a beauty. It's just that your luck is a little bad, so you don't have the chance to enjoy the 7 days of favor. Go back with me. Although I can't be as popular as sixth brother, I won't be tired of it after 7 days. She was just a dancer, so she naturally had no right to refuse. Li Hongming got the beauty, so he didn't bother to ask why Li Hongyuan was in a bad mood. Anyway, he just went through the motions at the beginning to explain to his mother. After Eunuch Mu sent Li Hongming away, he went to the study. Master, Lord Rui took her away. At this time, Li Hongyuan was not drunk at all. His face was expressionless, but the hostility in his eyes was frightening. Li Hongming has guts. He dares to have ideas about WAN. Tell that person to pass on the message that if she doesn't serve this prince's good third brother well, she will suffer a fate worse than death. Yes. Eunuch Mu said in his heart, Master, it hasn't reached that point. Lord Rui just lacks Miss Luo's identity. As for the dancer, she doesn't even know who her real target is. Her value is just SOSO. He wants to have Luo Peishan in his hand. You must let the others know. This time, if I don't cut off one of his arms, I'll wash your necks clean. In his previous life, Li Hongyuan didn't want the throne. At this time, he was helping Li Hongming. But obviously, Li Hongyuan was very wary of him. He didn't know what Li Hongming was doing. Sure enough, he was fully prepared. Nothing could escape from his hands. Chapter 20. Before lunch, Madame Luo called Chen Zhengmin over. Since she was already tempted, she might as well be decisive. She calmly inquired about her third brother's situation and Chen Zhengmin's background. Therefore, even Jingwan, who was sitting quietly next to her, did not notice anything amiss. As for the person being inquired about, he was not aware of it at all. Because he had heard his grandmother mention this grandaunt more than once, he knew that they had a good relationship. However, after his grandaunt got married, they rarely met, especially in the following 10 years. Therefore, he respectfully and politely answered all of Madame Luo's questions. It could be said that he did not hide anything and was very detailed. Madame Luo was a little sad. I don't know if we will have a chance to meet again in this lifetime. Grandfather said that he may return to the capital again. Grandaunt, you will definitely have a chance to meet grandfather again. Please take care of yourself. That's good, that's good. Madame Luo told him a few more things, such as not to study too hard, to rest early especially at night, and not to be cooped up at home all the time. He could also take some time to go out and walk around. If he encountered any problems, he could go directly to Luo Shongshu. If he was not there, he could also go to her. She would leave the questions for the evening and have someone send them back to Chen Zhengmin the next day. Chen Zhengmin was naturally very excited. His grandaunt was the third-place winner and had accumulated experience over the past few decades. Last time, he only gave him a little advice and he benefited a lot. However, will it be too much trouble for grandaunt? His face was slightly red. Was he embarrassed? Jingwan thought of herself as a thick-skinned person. It was rare to see a man blushing, and it was only because he might be troubling others. In her opinion, it was quite rare and she could not help but look at him a little more. However, knowing that he was troubling others, he was still honest about his desire. This kind of person was not bad. Madame Luo glanced at Jingwan secretly and smiled. It's not troublesome. It's just a small matter. Your grandaunt will also check on your fourth uncle and your cousins every day. Luo Peishan was willing to help talented juniors, not to mention the eldest grandson of his own brother. If WN could be engaged to him, his master would definitely do his best. Because it was just incidental, it made Chen Zhengmin feel less guilty. There were other people around, so Madame Luo couldn't ask for Jingwan's opinion, so she didn't mention it for the time being. The trip to the Chen clan could be said to be a joyous one. As for the displeasure in the hearts of those few people, who would care about it? When they left the Chen family, Jingwan was still kept by Madame Luo's side, and no one was left to serve them in the carriage. WN, how are you getting along with the Chen sisters? They are all very easy to get along with. The first branch of the Chen family did not have as many people as the Luo family. Moreover, the first 3 cousins of the Chen family were already married, while the last 2 were still relatively young. Therefore, there were only 3 or 4 people who were close to the age of Jingwan, including the second branch of the Chen family. Moreover, their temperament was relatively good. Except for a little cousin who always stared at her jewelry and said flattering words as if they were free, the only one who almost directly asked for it was a little annoying. Jingwan smiled and sent her away because she knew that once this kind of thing started, it might be out of control. She was not a child of wealth. It was just that the little girl would say that she was stingy behind her back. Jingwan was right. In fact, the little cousin was the daughter of Madame Yun. A woman who was unscrupulous and shameless. How well could she teach her daughter? While the little lass was complaining to her mother, the other girls were telling their respective grandmothers about the matter with ugly expressions on their faces. Thinking about that scene, they were so ashamed that they were unable to show their faces. Not only was Madame Chen furious, but even second Madame Chen was also very angry. Because she was dissatisfied with Madame Yun, she didn't care and let her do whatever she wanted. However, now she couldn't continue to indulge, otherwise, if she made the first branch unhappy, the entire second branch would be implicated. She called Madame Yun and her daughter over, scolded them, and grounded them for a month. It must be said that the little girl was also unruly in front of second Madame Chen. She shouted on the spot, and then second Madame Chen slapped her and threw her into the temple, where she was locked up for 3 days. Madame Yun was dissatisfied and angry. As a result, her daughter was locked up for 15 days. Only then did Madame Yun and her daughter know that they were afraid. Therefore, in this world, it was really easy for a mother-in-law to punish her daughter-in-law. She didn't even need to find a reason or an excuse. Madame Yun didn't cherish second Madame Chen's indifference before, so from today on, she was destined to be in deep trouble in the future. Madame Yun didn't dare to shout at second Madame Chen anymore, but in her heart, she deeply hated Jingwan. This was a new hatred that hadn't been settled yet. Jingwan also didn't know. If she knew, she would probably feel very wronged. This enemy really came a little inexplicable. Wan, what do you think of your cousin Minute? Jingwan was a little confused and didn't react for a moment. Grandmother is saying to let your cousin Minute be your husband. What do you think? Madame Luo was full of smiles as she teased. Jingwan was slightly startled. Her first reaction was that this was too fast. Before she came, they were still talking about her marriage. When she went back, they might have already decided on a fiancé for her. At first glance, it's not bad, but because it involves marriage, granddaughter feels that the first impression isn't that important. Jingwan said honestly. As for cousins, that was the norm in this world. Moreover, they weren't considered direct cousins. Their bloodline was diluted by the previous generation, so they were further apart. The possibility of hereditary diseases should also be reduced. You're right. We're not in a hurry. In the future, grandmother will think of a way to let you two meet a few more times. Let your grandfather help you take a good look. If Wan is satisfied, then we'll settle on him. If not, then we'll find someone else. However, we can't just focus on Minute Jia alone. While grandmother is still able to walk, you should go to more banquets in the future. As for your grandaunt, I'll also ask her to help you find a suitable candidate. Thank you, grandmother. Jingwan knew that in fact, her grandmother didn't like banquets that much. However, for her, she didn't hesitate to go to such lengths, even breaking traditional etiquette, to secretly help her cover up. How could she not be touched? Her eyes were slightly moist. Madame Luo patted her hand. Our Wan deserves the best. In her previous life, there was a period of time when Jingwan complained that the heavens were unfair. Why did they give her a happy family, but in the blink of an eye, it was shattered. That scumbag loved power so much, but why couldn't he just pretend and endure it for a lifetime? It was fine if he cheated, but for the sake of a fetus that they didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl, he actually harmed her mother. He used all his corruption and perverted the law to keep a mistress outside. Not only that, he was also involved with the underworld, gambling, and drugs. When the higher-ups started to investigate him, He suffered retribution and died a violent death. His originally wealthy family was completely shut down, and there was a pile of evidence. After his death, he was still able to perform meritorious deeds. The underworld leaders were in trouble. When they couldn't find their creditors, they went to them. Grandma had hurt her body to protect her, and for half a year, she had to suffer and despair. Those who had never experienced it would never understand how it felt. But later on, Jingwan felt that she was lucky. She had a grandmother who pulled her back from the edge of the abyss. After her grandmother passed away, she, who was muddle-headed, received spiritual comfort in a different world. What was even more fortunate was that she met another grandmother whose temperament and experience were completely different from her grandmother's, but who also did her best for her. The other relatives around her also treated her very well. If this wasn't considered lucky, then there weren't many lucky people in the world. When she returned to the Luo family, Madame Luo unexpectedly received an invitation from the Sun family's Duchess Ding. It turned out that the Sun Ijia's banquet tomorrow was only a part of the Sun family's banquet. After knowing that the wife of the Minister of Rights was coming to the capital, the Sun family sent another invitation. Before that, Jingwan's aunt, Madame Wang, had already received the invitation. As for the younger generation of Luo Jingying, they were completely unaware of this. They were all proud of receiving an invitation from Sun Ijia. The entire banquet invited almost all the noble madams and unmarried girls in the capital. Chapter 21. No matter what the purpose of the Sun family was, Madame Luo was ready to go. It was not only because of Jingwan's matter. Among the noble ladies in the capital, her status was not low, but she had never appeared before. Now that she was going to the capital, she had to give a signal. The interaction between the ladies in the inner courtyard was also very important. Therefore, even if she didn't like banquets, it was impossible for her to stay at home all the time. This time, it involved a wide range of people, so it was a good opportunity to get to know each other. Maybe she could even meet her former close friends. Madame Luo called her eldest daughter-in-law over and carefully asked about the relevant matters. After learning that Luo Jingying received the invitation alone, she didn't say anything. But when Luo Jingying reported that Madame Luo was going to Duke Dinggua's mansion, Madame Luo nodded, "Eldest daughter-in-law, go and prepare. WN, go back and change clothes. Fifth girl, come with us." Luo Jingying's face changed slightly. Although she wanted to embarrass Luo Jingwan in Duke Dinggua's mansion, after her mother taught her a lesson yesterday, her knees still hurt. She knew that it was not wise to punish Luo Jingwan now. She quickly calmed down. "Third sister and fifth sister are going with us." "That's great." Madame Luo looked at her faintly, neither happy nor angry. "Go back and change clothes." "Is there anything wrong with granddaughter's clothes?" Luo Jingying gently pursed her lips and asked with some apprehension. Madame Luo withdrew her gaze and glanced at her mother, Madame Liu. She lowered her head to drink tea and didn't speak again. Because of this glance, Madame Liu felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her gaze swept over her daughter. At first, she didn't think there was anything wrong, but when she saw Jingwan standing next to Luo Jingying, she finally understood the reason. She calmed down, walked to Luo Jingying's side, and took her hand. "Going out as a guest naturally can't be dressed casually like at home. Mother, it's also my fault for spoiling this girl. I have to keep an eye on her for everything, so I didn't pay attention and didn't know how to dress. I'll take her back and dress her up well. I'm sure you'll be satisfied." Madame Luo nodded indifferently. When the mother and daughter appeared, the others also dispersed. Luo Jingying was pulled away by Mrs. Liu. He was very reluctant to change his clothes, but he endured it and did not say anything. She used to dress like this when she went out, trying to dress as elegantly as possible. In addition, she was quite famous and was sought after by many young masters. These were all her assets. Today, she had spent a long time getting dressed. Back in the small courtyard of Luo Jingying, Mrs. Liu asked the maidservant to take out her clothes and jewelry. When she saw that most of the clothes were simple and elegant, she couldn't help but frown. However, there were also some colorful clothes, so she didn't have to worry. "Change into it." Luo Jingying was very resistant. She didn't like the clothes her mother had picked out. If you don't want to go to Duke Dinggua's mansion, you don't have to change. Mother, why? How did I offend that grandmother again? Luo Jingying suppressed her anger and grievance. You always dress so plainly and don't have any jewelry on your body. Outsiders will think that the Luo family cheated you. Mrs. Liu said calmly. Before, when your grandmother was not here, your aunt was in charge. Even if outsiders felt something, they wouldn't say it. After all, we are two branches. Now that your grandmother is here, you are still the same. It's inevitable that people will say that your grandmother mistreats her son. Isn't this better? Good. Ying you know that your grandmother is a kind person who loves her children and grandchildren. She hopes that all of her descendants will be well. Luo Jingying moved her lips. She seemed to understand something. Even if the person in charge was her aunt, in fact, the head of the family was still her grandmother. If her grandmother's reputation was ruined, how could they, the grandchildren, get away with it? Not to mention that their grandmother didn't mistreat them. Even if she did mistreat them, they would hide it well instead of shouting that everyone knew. Luo Jingying closed her eyes to hide all the emotions in her eyes. She let the maidservant change her clothes, comb her hair, and put on makeup for her. Mrs. Liu watched from the side. She wanted her daughter to be beautiful, but she couldn't be gaudy, and she couldn't cover up her previous elegance. It was impossible for Mrs. Liu to be outstanding in these aspects. However, she didn't stay in the Luo family for more than 10 years in vain. When she first got married, she was secretly ridiculed because of her dress. No one specifically taught her. She also watched how others did it. Little by little, she developed a good taste. She couldn't let her daughter suffer everything she did. Mrs. Liu personally chose a hairpin for her and put it in her hair. Well, Ying also looks beautiful in this. Luo Jingying looked at herself in the mirror and then looked at the maidservant's expressions. It seemed that she really looked good. Thank you, mother. Mrs. Liu nodded. Let's go. Luo Jingying spent a lot of time. When it was time to go to the main courtyard, she seemed to be the only one left. The mother and daughter hurriedly apologized. Old Madame Luo didn't say much and the group set off. Only then did Luo Jingying know that her grandmother and her aunt were also traveling together. Before, they didn't say anything. Was it deliberately to make her lose face? Even if she tried to restrain herself, Luo Jingying's eyes still fell on Jingwan from time to time. Compared with yesterday's dress, there was no one on her body that was the same. Although not everything was expensive, the worst was still comparable to the best on her body. They were both surnamed Luo, and they clearly had the same grandfather, but there was still such a big difference. How could people be at peace? Luo Jingying forced herself to look away. Out of sight, out of mind. The Duke of Dinggua's residence was the true leader of the nobility, and also the only duke title. The entire mansion occupied an area larger than many Juanwang's manors. Not to mention, there were probably countless things inside. Because there were a lot of people today, Jingwan and the others waited in the carriage for more than half an hour before it was their turn to enter the mansion. She didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but the elders' and juniors' invitations were separated. When Luo Jingying found out that Jingwan did not receive the invitation card like her grandmother, she unconsciously straightened her back and felt a sense of pride that was hard to hide in her heart. When Jingwan inadvertently looked over, she gently waved the invitation card in her hand as if she was showing off. With a smile, she handed the invitation card over. The granny who received the invitation card smiled very kindly, which made Luo Jingying mistakenly think that she was particularly important to her. Her smile became even more arrogant. Jingwan followed beside Madame Luo with a smile and didn't say anything. Luo Jingying focused all of her attention on her. If she paid attention to other people, her mood probably wouldn't be so good. Whether it was the people in front of them or behind them, these young ladies all had invitations in their hands. Moreover, the materials and patterns of the invitations were all different. It could be inferred that Sun Yijia also sent out invitations this time. Moreover, the invitations were divided into different grades. There were probably only a few invitations that were truly made by Sun Yijia. The things that were originally precious were actually worthless. Sitting in the small sedan chair, with a very rhythmic sway, they went deep into Duke Ding's mansion. Jingwan reached out to touch the materials used in the small sedan chair. Should she say that it was indeed the Sun family? How many people who could get a bolt of cloud silk would hide it like a treasure? If there was a bolt of cloud silk in the dowry, they would be able to earn a little face when showing off the dowry. However, the Sun family cut large pieces of cloud silk to decorate the sedan chair that was only used in the mansion. Should she say that they were rich and imposing, or that they had a deep background? Jingwan didn't think much of it. She lived a life of luxury and once lived on the streets. In terms of material things, she didn't have many requirements. However, in Duke Ding's mansion, there was an empress who was the mother of the world. Among the princes, Prince Kang's ability wasn't the best, but it wasn't bad either. Although His Majesty doted on noble consort Su, he wasn't biased to the ends of the earth. Prince Kang was the eldest son of the first wife. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes, the probability of him becoming the crown prince was more than 70%. This family could be said to be full of flowers and unlimited scenery. However, if they were so ostentatious and didn't restrain themselves at all, wouldn't it be like adding oil to the fire? The person who came to greet old Madame Luo was the eldest daughter-in-law of Duke Ding. She looked to be in her early 20s. She had a dignified bearing and a perfect smile. She first bowed to old Madame Luo and then intimately chatted with her. She didn't make people feel awkward when they first met because she was too enthusiastic. Jingwan believed that if it were her, she wouldn't be able to do it even after a few more decades. At most, she would be neither too close nor too distant. This was the attitude most people had towards people who met for the first time. And this person was only 10 years older than her. They could be considered to be of the same generation. As for Jingwan and the other two, she also praised them one by one without bias. Jingwan accepted it generously. Lu Jingying's face was a little red, but she didn't make a mistake. It was probably the first time Lu Jingyu faced such an occasion. She was a little nervous. However, because she was used to being wooden, she looked a little stiff. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.